Obviously, sports betting is growing in every sport, but I'm always fascinated. I love my golf. It's probably my favorite sport, and I look at golf as an event that has literally probably tens of thousands of possible bet scenarios within a weekend of action. So, give us a sense as far as your overall approach towards integrating live odds into digital platforms, web apps, all that kind of environment.
Yeah, sure. You talked about tens of thousands. In a typical tournament, we have over 32,000 shots taken. So if you think about it from just a pure, just like betting on the action, there's 32,000 just different possibilities on those shots. Never mind the 144 players, up to 154 players in some events that we have. So there's a lot of different moving parts and pieces that someone can bet on. So when it comes to how we think about it from a digital experience standpoint, we've actually integrated live odds into some of our live scoring experiences inside of our digital platform. So on our website and our app, we have a section called odds that's adjacent to our leaderboard, where a fan can go in before an event starts and see who the pre-tournament favorites are. With it, they can see some of the different prop bets, like who's going to be the top American. You can see who's going to make the cut, or bet on, or see what the odds are for who's going to make the cut or not. And then you can even compare across multiple different betting operators there too. So you can see how the odds stack up for different players across those different betting operators. We've also integrated into Tourcast, our 3D shot visualization tool. So every couple of holes, we have a little interstitial that comes up while a group's waiting to tee off. So you can see how the odds are progressing for each of those players. And then on each player's profile page, we have the odds for that player. So if you're browsing through, looking at their scorecard, you can see just that individual player's odds to win the tournament on that page.
So, Eric, I wanted to touch a little bit on the actual what goes on, or what kind of engagement you see during the live event, because obviously, for most people, when it comes to sports betting, you're thinking in terms of before the game, placing the big bet, before the tournament, placing the big bet. But what do you see as far as the interaction during a round and during play, as far as when the odds keep changing and shifting?
Yeah, we've actually seen that during the round, especially on Sunday during the final round, that's when we see some of our traffic peak. We see fans gravitating towards these different components inside our app, as well as our website, and their interest is peaked during, and it's actually one of the most used components during live play. So I don't know if fans are just interested in how the lines bounce up and down, if they're using it as kind of a probability component. But it is interesting to see, especially on Sunday, if you have two guys that are coming down neck and neck on the 18th hole. One guy puts the ball in the water, the other guy's on the green. How quickly those lines change, and it seesaws, and especially in a playoff too. If two guys are going in a playoff, you will see odds ping pong all over the place just based on where a person's ball is on that hole. So it's really interesting to watch, and I think fans find it interesting as well.
So as far as the live, do you think we're going to get to a point when people will be able to, when the time between placing a bet and the player getting ready for the next shot, are we going to get to that point where you're kind of like able to bet on a shot by shot basis? Do you think at some point?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's likely the goal, kind of in mass right now. The thing about golf is you sometimes have, for each player you have 8 minutes a lot of time between shots. I mean, if a guy walks from the tee box to his second shot, you have a decent amount of time. It's harder when they're on the green and they're just doing a tap in, but yeah, you have a considerable amount of time to kind of assess where a guy is, look at the odds, and think about what his chances are. And again, you multiply that by the amount of balls that are in the air, and there's a lot of opportunities out there for that.
Excellent. So now, obviously, there's a lot of data coming through the system with ShotLink, and then there's Top Tracer. There's so many cool data sets coming through. The on-course people who are kind of punching through what clubs being used. It's an intense, amount of data that comes through that's shown to the people watching the broadcast. So, how do you kind of integrate? How does it all kind of flow through the system, if you will, and then get into first standardizing it so that it kind of is a consistent experience for fans across the board?
Yeah, so there's two ways to think about it. The first is we have a deal with IMG Arena to syndicate our data for live betting. So certain operators work with IMG Arena. They license our data through IMG Arena, and they can get the official ShotLink data from IMG in order to influence lines and betting odds that way. From our standpoint on the digital platforms, we have 4 official betting operators that we work with. So we work with DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, and PointsBet. And each one of those different operators has its own kind of flavor for how they distribute odds. And what we ended up doing was, in order to help improve and just kind of standardize things on our end, we partnered with a company named SharpLink to actually provide us with odds standardization software. So what SharpLink does is they work with each of those betting operators. They also work with our player IDs and our player data, and basically send us back a standardized feed of data, so that we know that if a player is minus 180, minus 200, minus 250, and minus 100 across the 4 different operators, we don't have to go and integrate each operator's odds separately. We can standardize it on our side, which leads to a lot of efficiency on our end. And switching out operators or featuring one versus the other, we don't have to integrate with all the moving pieces of each of the betting operators. So for a group like ours that's trying to integrate a lot of different moving parts and pieces, it's really helped streamline our process on our end.
Excellent. I'm sure that each of them want the information all at the same time also. I'm sure that's a big deal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So as far as, the obviously the international community, when you go over to the UK, very different betting environment, and obviously there's a lot of European golfers out there too. So how do you kind of, are there international considerations that have to be kind of taken into consideration? Because obviously these apps can be used everywhere too, and website access from around the world as well.
Right. That was actually a big part of what we talked about, because the way we do lines and betting odds here is different than the way they do in the UK. So we've been using the plus minus system here, which sometimes doesn't translate internationally. So what we've ended up doing, at least with the betting operators we have right now, is it's limited to just the US. So the 4 betting operators that we have, their odds only appear here in the US. So if you're in the UK or Ireland, or any part of Australia, different parts of the world, you don't see any of the odds and any of the odds integrations in there right now. We set it up like that so that if we end up bringing another group along that might be in one of those countries, we can actually plug them in to the system. And we set all that up at the start to be able to do that. But right now, we just have domestic betting operaters. So those odds and those integrations only appear for users that are here in the United States.
I see. So I was out at the Ryder Cup a couple weeks back, and one of the interesting things was that you had a fantasy game there on the app. So what's your sense as far as fantasy games and gamification and sort of helping golf fans kind of get used to, if you will, sort of being part of games and betting and kind of that behavior, if you will.
Right. I think everything that we look at is just educating. You can't bet directly from our platforms. You can use it for education purposes, and we've done that same thing, and we're kind of thinking it's along the same lines in terms of our fantasy game. So, for example, this past March, we had a bracket challenge for our Dell Match Play tournament, and what we allowed users to do was actually use the odds as a way to understand who might be the favorite or the underdog in each of the matchups. So when you were going through picking your bracket, you could actually flip on the odds, which were brought to us by DraftKings, and you could actually look at who was the favorite in each of those picks. And as you kind of went through and made your picks, you could use that as kind of a wayfinding in order to help with your matchups along the way. And so I think that's kind of how we see it. We see these really being educational components to help you understand like who might be the favorite, who might be an underdog with it. And that's really kind of how we view the use of odds throughout our platforms.
Gotcha. So the other thing I got to experience over in the UK was, you walk in some of these football stadiums and down in the basement, they would have a stand with a chalkboard, and they would literally write up different prop bets in chalk and erase them during the matches. What do you see as the opportunity for, placing bets at a golf course? And are there any plans at this point to kind of make that possible?
Yeah, so we announced back in April at TPC Scottsdale, out where the Waste Management Phoenix Open is held. DraftKings is going to be opening a sports book there on the golf course. And so that'll be a sports book. DraftKings will run it. It'll be operated out of the clubhouse at the golf course. And so, that's the first of who knows how many of those to come in the future. But, as you said, you see that in stadiums now. I think there's been a couple announced here stateside as well. I think that's probably a trend that you're going to see here across the board in the coming years. Excellent.
Great. If there's any golf tournament that represents Las Vegas, it is the Scottsdale and the Waste Management Open. That is for sure. It feels like Vegas when you go out there. That is for sure.
Yeah.
So, Awesome. Well, thanks so much for Eric for your time. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon.
Great. Thanks, Ken.